The House Oversight Committee has voted to subpoena Attorney General Pam Bondi in relation to the Epstein files. This follows an incredibly controversial hearing with Bondi in front of members of Congress, where she repeatedly insisted that the Department of Justice had done nothing wrong, that President Trump had done nothing wrong, and that the stock market was doing great. So, why do people care about the Epstein case, anyways? Interestingly enough, this charge to now subpoena Bondi and investigate this government cover up is coming from some of Donald Trump's own loyalists in Congress, which shows a staggering level of cognitive dissonance around the fact that the DOJ has removed files relating to sexual assault allegations against Donald Trump. That's part of a much broader removal of files that Democrats in Congress, as well as journalists, are looking into, since the DOJ has restricted, redacted, and now removed tens of thousands of pieces of information, potentially in violation of the very Epstein Files Transparency Act that required them to disclose this information to the public in the first place. Nancy Mace is one of the key people who pushed to subpoena Pam Bondi. She's a Republican representative from South Carolina and an incredibly controversial figure in her own right. This is what she had to say on X about Pam Bondi. She said, "Breaking. We're moving to subpoena U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. Bondi claims the DOJ has released all of the Epstein files. The record is clear. They have not. The Epstein case is one of the greatest cover ups in American history. His global sex trafficking network is larger than what is being revealed. 3 million documents have been released, and we still don't have the full truth. Videos are missing, audio is missing, logs are missing. There are millions more documents out there. We want to know why the DOJ is more focused on shielding the powerful than delivering justice. The American people deserve answers. Victims deserve justice. Hold the line." And then she posted this graphic. Representative Nancy Mace moves to subpoena Attorney General Pam Bondi. Now, NBC News reported that the House Oversight Committee is a Republican led committee, and it is voting with a slight majority to subpoena Pam Bondi, a crucial member of the Trump administration. Those Republicans who joined their Democratic peers to push this legislation forward included Nancy Mace, who was the one who put the motion forward in the first place, as well as Tim Burchett of Tennessee, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Michael Cloud of Texas, and Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. This is a really interesting break from Trump's agenda from some of these members of Congress. And it's part of a pattern we've been seeing play out over the past year, where Epstein is the very issue splintering some of Trump's support in Congress. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who left Congress largely over her disputes with the president regarding Epstein, is the key example here. But these other Congress people, Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace in particular, are really interesting case studies because, on one hand, they're really pushing for further transparency and action and arguably accountability around the Epstein case. But on the other hand, they're continuing to be massive supporters of Donald Trump and have even made comments suggesting that the Epstein files help prove Trump's innocence, when that is very much not so the case. And again, looking at Nancy Mace specifically, who is the one who pushed to subpoena Pam Bondi, she is such a fascinating individual case study because as an individual, she's come forward on the floor of Congress to make allegations against her ex-husband of being sexually assaulted herself. She identifies as a survivor, and she's sort of positioned herself as a champion for survivors across a number of political issues, but especially the Epstein case. But another thing to know about Nancy Mace is that she doesn't represent all survivors or all people who are vulnerable to sexual abuse equally. Another thing that she's done in her time in Congress is she's been incredibly anti trans and anti LGBTQ in general, but particularly she takes issue with trans women. And trans women are one of the most uniquely vulnerable populations to sexual violence. So, although Nancy Mace positions herself as a champion for sexual violence survivors, she also endangers them at the same time by pushing this rhetoric against trans people that positions them as predators when they are much, much, much more likely likely to be victims of cis people. So Nancy Mace's track record isn't exactly clean, and even in her recent tweets around this announcement about pushing to subpoena Pam Bondi, she's pushing a lot of unhelpful rhetoric at the exact same time. For example, just 1 hour ago, she posted, "Where is all the outrage from the left now? Where are all the activists flocking to social media to condemn our government? Congress literally voted to cover up sexual harassment and misconduct, and no one seems to care. Notice how it's crickets when it can't be pinned on President Trump." She also, just 1 hour ago, posted that the people worried about the possibility of sleeper cell terrorists are the same people who have been protesting and attacking ICE officers. So, on other issues, she supports Trump. She pushes these lines about leftist activists. She pushes support for ICE, and we already know that ICE is part of a systematic process of sexually abusing migrant people and immigrants. So again, Nancy Mace doesn't treat all victims equally. She also doesn't treat all alleged perpetrators equally, because a key issue we're going to unpack here is how the exact files that the Department of Justice is covering up related to Epstein also relate to sexual assault allegations against Trump. So Nancy Mace can't have it all of these various different ways. She can't pretend to be a champion against sexual violence when her other positions support and enable sexual violence. She can't claim to go against perpetrators when she supports one of the biggest alleged perpetrators of them all. And although her ultimate actions around the Epstein case have allowed victims to pursue more transparency, she also isn't a perfect figure to represent this fight. And she shouldn't really be gaining on a personal level because of the Epstein case when she hasn't proven any consistency in this viewpoint elsewhere. But Nancy Mace, as a person aside, she is right in her core claims about what the DOJ has not done with regards to the Epstein files and what it's supposed to do according to the law. The Wall Street Journal reported this week that there are currently more than 47,000 Epstein files offline for review. And some of these files were never released to the public, even though they were legally required to be published. A DOJ spokesperson told the Journal that these files were offline for further review and should be ready for reproduction by the end of the week. Now, when the DOJ initially started releasing the Epstein files, survivors immediately had concerns with what was being published and what was being redacted. A lot of the names of alleged perpetrators and a lot of details that could have helped victims gain clarity, transparency, and accountability, well, those were covered up with black boxes. And you may remember during those initial document dumps, some people were able to figure out what was being redacted because they were still able to copy and paste what was behind those black boxes into another document. So you had redaction errors from the outset. You also have allegations that these documents are being overly redacted to protect alleged perpetrators and Epstein's co conspirators. Donald Trump is a prominent name among those who are suspected of having allegations against him and also of potentially co conspiring. Trump's name is mentioned in the Epstein files thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And some of these documents that are being withheld right now contain allegations from Epstein accusers against Donald Trump as well. But it wasn't just the redactions and what was withheld from the public that raised a lot of alarm. There were also tons of things left in the files that put victims' lives in danger. Victims' names were left in unredacted, including anonymous Jane Does. Victims' personal information was left in unredacted, including ways to find them and contact them, things that put them at immediate risk for danger and retaliation. And another thing, one of the most shocking things that was initially left in the files were nude photos of some of the victims. I cannot even comprehend the level of institutional betrayal at play here in further re victimizing these victims of child sexual abuse who had already been failed by the exact same federal departments for decades. You have FBI reports against Epstein dating back to the 90s, which means that for 40 years, the FBI and the Department of Justice and federal prosecutors have failed to hold child sex traffickers accountable. They have failed to deliver any sort of justice for victims. And the reason that the Epstein Files Transparency Act came about last year is because the DOJ said they had no plans to charge anyone else in this case. Despite there being over 1,000 victims, the DOJ wanted to just wipe its hands and walk away. And it was mainly thanks to the efforts of those victims that we're where we're at right now, having these files to go through. Already, so much has been found from within these files, which raises questions about what we're not able to find because the Department of Justice is keeping it secret from the American public in blatant violation of the law. Now, multiple outlets, including NBC News, have reported that these missing documents include summaries and notes from 3 interviews the FBI conducted with a woman who alleged she was a sexual assault victim of Epstein and also Donald Trump. This was a South Carolina woman, which I'll come back to in a second, because that means she's one of Nancy Mace's constituents. When NBC News asked the White House for comment, they referred to a statement the Justice Department previously issued. That statement was that some of the documents contain untrue and sensationalist claims against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. To be clear, the claims are unfounded and false, and if they have a shred of credibility, they certainly would have been weaponized against President Trump already. Here's the problem with that. I mean, there's a lot of problems with that statement. First of all, the Justice Department's role is not to defend the president. This is not supposed to be a partisan organization. They are not supposed to be loyal to whoever is in the White House at any given time. But we already know that this Department of Justice has that loyalty to Trump, in part because senior figures have previously represented Trump as his personal lawyer. So, of course, they have a loyalty to the president that they should not have. Their loyalty should be to the American public and to these victims, not to alleged perpetrators. But that is the case as we have it now. And we can see that so clearly in this statement because they claim that this woman came forward shortly before the 2020 election, suggesting that this was a form of election interference. But that is not true. NBC News reported that this woman came forward to the FBI shortly after Epstein was arrested in 2019. The FBI didn't determine that these allegations weren't credible. Instead, they followed up with her 4 more times: July 24th, 2019, August 7th, 2019, August 20th, 2019, and then October 16th, 2019. Let me tell you something about sexual assault investigations. If the authorities don't think there's any merit to allegations, they are not going to go out of their way to conduct follow up interviews in quick succession like this. That does not happen. Most victims, when reporting allegations of sexual abuse to the authorities, get very little support or follow up in response. So the fact that the FBI was taking this woman seriously does indicate something. It does not, as Trump and Pam Bondi and even Nancy Mace have said, exonerate him. The opposite of that, it raises tons of questions that can likely only be answered if the DOJ actually releases these files in their unredacted form. And something really depressing about these interviews is that in the versions that have previously been released, the Wall Street Journal reports the woman told agents that she was aware that because she was claiming abuse from years earlier, the statutes of limitations of any viable federal violation might have run out. She asked agents, "What's the point?" Agents assured her that all victims of crime should have an opportunity to tell their stories. But how can federal agents claim that when that woman has been proven absolutely correct in her assessment that it wouldn't really matter if she came forward and talked about Donald Trump specifically? Because she did come forward years ago. And what happened as a result of that? All we've seen since from the federal government are efforts to cover up what she said, a failure to pursue accountability, and somewhat of a smear against this woman for claiming that she made false allegations when she was the one who said she didn't even want to make the allegations, and the FBI cajoled her to do so repeatedly. This is an absolute systemic failure and institutional betrayal for this woman, a South Carolinian woman. And that is really important because going back to Nancy Mace, who is the representative for South Carolina, who stands by Donald Trump, out of one side of her mouth, Nancy Mace is saying that she stands with and supports the Epstein victims. Out the other side, she's standing and supporting with Donald Trump, a man who, in the Epstein files, was accused of sexually assaulting a woman in Nancy Mace's own home state. So, Nancy, again, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot claim to pursue justice for victims while also supporting Donald Trump, someone who has falsely determined himself to be exonerated by these missing, covered up files, somebody who pushed against the release of these files in the first place, someone who does not care for victims, somebody who was already legally found liable of sexual abuse in court. If Nancy Mace authentically, truly valued victims of sexual violence, she would not support Donald Trump. That much is very, very clear. I agree with her in her desire to see these files returned to the public, but just because she argues for the right thing in this case does not mean that Republicans, generally speaking, are on the right side of history when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein. And we need more than just these files being released to the public. We need actual accountability and change. It's so clear that there is systemic corruption and failure and betrayal for victims at the highest levels of government. We need more than just transparency. We need more than just closed door interviews with these key figures. We need actual justice to occur here. That is what people are pushing for. And so it is so important in this moment to be discerning of who actually fights for that type of justice and who is just trying to use the Epstein case as positive PR for themselves.